Okay, if you could have a seat, we've got an exciting panel. I thought Representative Lewis' panel was wonderful, and I've got an opportunity to help moderate what I consider to be as equal or perhaps better even than the previous panels. But we want to follow the procedure that Judge Lewis did, and we'll just kind of go down the line. I'm Representative Drew Darby. You've heard far too much about me this morning, so I'm not going to belabor that. By the way, welcome former Senator Tommy Williams. I just see you just came in, so welcome, Senator. We've got a great panel. We're going to talk about water innovations in the industry, and we're going to look at regulatory, recycling, reuse, and results. And so we're just going to go right down the line, and if each one of the panel members will introduce themselves and say whatever you'd like, and then we'll follow up afterwards with some questions. So, Representative Commissioner Christy Craddock first.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Drew, and thank you all for having us this morning. My name is Christy Craddock, and I am a railroad commissioner. I'm kind of the newbie, so I know you've heard from one this morning. I'm one of the others, and as most of y'all know, there's three of us. So I don't know if all three of us got here, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad, actually. I'm glad to be here, and I need to start out by saying, and I know there are other legislators in the room who helped, but Drew, for us, this last session was our champion, and so I want to thank you again for everything that you did for us. We, as y'all heard, and I think a little bit in the last panel, went to the legislature last cycle and said, we have a little problem that our IT is about 20 years old, and we have money available. Can you please allow us to use it to upgrade our IT? And we're having some challenges, as you might think about, with salaries. We can't pay our folks enough to compete with industry. We're not even trying, but we wanted to compete with other agencies like TCEQ, who hire the same folks. And for a little analysis, we're paying $40,000 for a first-year engineer. Industry was paying closer to $100,000. So for us to actually compete, so Drew was a huge champion for us. I know Representative Otto was in the room as well, but Drew was our champion, and we appreciate it, and we hope we're making good use of your money. Because our real goal for IT upgrade is to make our world more transparent and more efficient, by the way, on both ends. So we think we're about a year out from being fully vested in our program, and we may come back and ask for a little bit more, by the way. So just thought I'd drop that in publicly while I'm in this conversation. But part of what we've really focused on in the past year, and where I think, and I joke on this sort of, and I grew up in Midland, so I can say this because water's been a big part of my life as well. The droughts made a huge difference, and I think it's made the industry more aware of their water usage and what's going on. And interestingly for me, and you're going to hear from kind of the expert, the gentleman next to me, as far as what they do as a company, but made them more innovative. And so one of the things that we've worked on this past year at the commission, and we're about 15 months into a rule that we worked on, was redoing our recycling rules. And why is that important? Look, we use as an industry about 2% of the state's water, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is in different parts of the state more than it should be, probably. And what industry is figuring out how to do, and do it well, I think, is use different sources of water, so they're not using yours and my drinking water, our fresh water, every day. So that is more brackish water, they're recycling, they're using flow back and produced water. And so we wanted to make sure our rules at the Railroad Commission were in place to not impede those recycling efforts. And so our rules have been in place about 15 months. What we've seen even in those 15 months, and probably it's more like 18 months, 2 years, is more technology come online to recycle, more companies wanting to recycle and use no fresh water or very little fresh water if they can figure out how to do it, use brackish water. And we wanted to make sure our rules got out of the way. And were helpful to companies, so that technology will continue to grow, and we can continue to have more companies use recycled water. It makes good sense for us. We're all in a drought. I mean, you've got, Wichita Falls et al. And others, Big Spring, using effluent water, which some companies are trying to figure out how to do as well in their use with water. So you've got companies looking at it. that is one of the things we think is important at the Railroad Commission is using recycled water. And I say that because when you're drilling as many wells as you are, and for perspective, at this point we've permitted about 5,000 wells in the Permian Basin alone so far this year. Last year we permitted about 8,800, the year before about 9,600. So we're on track to exceed that number. And you've got to do something with that waste. And so not everybody wants to put it down an injection well, which we've permitted 30,000 injection wells in this state historically. This waste has to go someplace. It's nice to be able to recycle it and reuse the water and figure out how to use different sources. So I want to applaud companies, but we wanted to make sure as an agency we were part of the solution instead of part of them stopping progress. And I look forward to answering questions as we go along, and thank y'all for having me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to show some pictures. So before the pictures come up, I'm Cal Cooper. I'm from Apache Corporation in Houston. I do a lot of fun things in Apache, but one of the main things I've been able to do over the past several years is lead Apache's efforts in water treatment, water recycling, all the chemicals of fracking. I'm sort of a geek about a lot of that stuff, but today I just want to show you pictures. I want to talk about some stuff that's really important to Apache. We have, are the pictures up yet? We have a very large operation not far from here in Erie County, north of Barnard. Many people who work for Apache, many of our contractors live here in San Angelo or in the immediate environs of San Angelo. So this is kind of home for us. I think that we had a really great group of people that were able to do a huge amount in our water space because they really cared. And many of those people are from San Angelo. So let me show you some pictures. I don't know that you really need to look at these little pictures, so I'll get on with. All of you in the room have heard plenty that we have a lot of oil and gas, we have a lot of water, and I want everybody to remember that water, from this picture, if you take away one idea, is that water is always a local problem because of the distribution of aquifers, the distribution of surface sources, and what the industry is using. So there's not a panacea answer for everybody. You have to work at it. Uh-oh, what happened here? Did I turn it off? Maybe that's not supposed to be my next slide, so let me go back. Okay, well, let's make it my next slide. So, and we've talked a lot about water, and I just want to remind everybody of some very simple differences in water types. So there's fresh water, which can be on the surface, and most of you here are very aware in West Texas that a lot of fresh water also comes from groundwater wells. There's brackish water, which is usually not considered fit for human drinking. It can be used in agriculture sometimes it's too much for that. That can be underneath fresh water. It can be commingled with fresh water. And we also have saline waters as we go usually deeper in our section. Sometimes it's mixed up. But very importantly, we have a great deal of produced water, especially in the Permian Basin. And that produced water is a major resource that we as companies are trying to reuse and not just send to disposal wells. So when you try to understand water systems, you have to do a lot of work. And I heard Tom Williams say a little earlier today about some of the very good work that has been done in the Eagle Ford area. So when Apache started looking at the Permian Basin, we had a bunch of our very best geoscientists get on with trying to figure out where is the water. This is a huge amount of work, just like looking for oil, mapping reservoirs in the subsurface. We identified two really big sources of alternative water, I mean not usually fresh water, in the Permian Basin that we could depend on. One of those we call the Santa Rosa Formation. It's shown in the more map formation there. And the other one, the sort of horseshoe-looking thing, is the Capitan Reef Complex, which is mostly in the western part of the basin. Both of those offer huge amounts of water that can be used for many purposes other than fresh water. It's also true that the Capitan has fresh water in it as well. What we learned about the Santa Rosa Formation by studying it a lot, by doing a lot of pressure tests and all kinds of science, is that it really is separated from the overlying freshwater aquifers, especially in Erie County and the part we're working. That is very important to us, because if we were going to withdraw a lot of water from the Santa Rosa, we want to make sure that we aren't just dropping the fresh water too. And we know we're not, because we've made a lot of measurements. So let me show you some pictures now, which this is a map, but what it shows is that I have a bunch of different blobs. And what I'm trying to say here is that to make a water system work and be economic, it has to be big. And you have to have places to store produced water. You have to have a place to have a treating facility, and it all has to be plumbed around somehow so you can move water from one place to another. And that's exactly what we did in Barnard, where we have these 4 very large facilities. I'll show you the pictures of some of them. So this should be a picture that shows a big water pit. That water pit is filled with the Santa Rosa water, which in that particular area runs around 3,000 TDS. And then you see something that look like grain bins in front of them. The grain bins are something that Apache brought from operations we had in Canada. We had an engineer up there who said, why not bring them to Texas? And so we did. And these grain bins we have turned into big systems for storing produced water and treating produced water. Here you see 6 of them. Each of them is about 30,000 barrels. We normally don't fill them past about 27,000 barrels. They have all kinds of leak detection systems under it, monitoring systems while they're being filled or when they're filled. Underneath the whole area, we have a plumbing system so that if there's ever a problem, it gets drained away, and we're not going to flood, hopefully, a freshwater resource underneath it. And I think this is an example of a lot of innovative thinking by a bunch of people, that we'll see a lot of stuff like this in West Texas. Apache has improved this process quite a bit, even over the past 2 years. And we are building at least 3 other systems like this in Reagan County, in Andrews County, and probably some other places we haven't announced yet. Sometimes we do some totally different things. So you may know that Apache's been very active also in around the College Station area. Well, College Station doesn't have quite such a problem of fresh water because they have a lot of it underground. But we decided that we could use the effluent from the sewage plant and have that treated and use that instead of using otherwise freshwater resources. So there's a lot of thinking out of the box that you have to do here in order to get the water you need to frack without impacting fresh water. Now some statistics for you, just because I don't think just telling people we're doing something is really what you want to. A lot of people want to know, well, tell me how big is it? And so here you have balloons. I don't know, I tell people, I'm sorry, I went to Rice, so Rice is known for water balloon fights, at least to Rice students. So, you know, I think of water balloon fights here, and we have the biggest balloon there is from our Erie County area, where more than half of the water we use already is from produced water, and the other remaining share is not from fresh water. It is from the Santa Rosa Formation, which is a brackish water. So the blue balloons there are the freshwater ones, and you can see we have lots of little blue balloons because we have lots of facilities that are just too small to really, at this point, economically sustain a treatment center. Now that might change as we make these treatment centers more efficient and cheaper and portable. And with the Railroad Commission's help, we've been able to try a lot of stuff. Thank you. But the point is, in this year alone, Apache has used more than half of its frack water in the entire Permian Basin has been by recycling water and mixing it with brackish water. We think that by the end of this year, we predict we will use this year about 40 million barrels of water in the Permian Basin for fracking, and more than half of it will either be about a quarter of it will be recycled produced water, and about a quarter of it will be Santa Rosa water. So major big deal, and we only want to expand this. We want to work with a lot of other companies. We recently toured 27 other companies to our facilities to explain to them what we're doing. I will say that the treatment of the water that goes on is high-level chemistry, and I won't bore you with those details, but it takes some real thinking there, too, in order to do it very cheaply. If you can't do it cheaply, it's not going to be done, but we think it can. So thank you very much. I'm going to skip this slide, and these are some guys that live here in this city. Some of you know Scooter Foreman, I think, if you're from this town. He's a great guy, and he has done a huge job leading our water efforts in Erie County. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Wow, what a success story. Thank you. I'm Kathleen Jackson, and I'm with the Texas Water Development Board. I'm the newest director, and we also have 3. My background is that I came from the private sector, so I worked for just 37 years for ExxonMobil. And I was an engineer by background, but I did their public and government affairs. Governor Perry made the opportunity available to come and work with the Texas Water Development Board. And so I retired on a Friday, and I started on a Tuesday because he said, get here as quick as you can. So I'm very excited about what our challenges are that are before us. I think we have a great staff at the Water Development Board and great opportunity with Proposition 6 and with House Bill 4 that the legislature has put together, and what leadership from Chairman Darby and others, and we're so appreciative of that and the opportunities that we have. We think to help to make the water resources available to Texas that will help us to continue in our leadership role throughout the country. Figuratively speaking, there really is an energy pipeline that goes from Texas to the rest of the nation. So what we're doing here in Texas in oil and gas not only benefits Texas, but it also benefits America as a country and makes us strong. So we want to be able to not only sustain what we're doing, but to continue to invest and to grow our oil and gas as well as other sectors within the Texas economy. We all know that agriculture was our mainstay, and in the early days really helped to establish Texas as a state. It is important. My husband was a rice farmer, and he used to tell me when we were dating, he said, Kathleen, we make a perfect pair because people got to have food and they've got to have energy. And so it's important that as we move forward and we look at our future water supplies, that we're making sure that we have enough water for all of the sectors so that we continue to be competitive. What we know, and the Water Development Board is involved in water planning. We are the facilitator of that. And Texas, of course, has been in a leadership role throughout the country in doing water planning so that what we move forward and we do is very thoughtful, and it follows a logical process. So in the water planning process, what we know is that 1/3 of our future needs will come from conservation, 1/3 of it will come from efficiency, and 1/3 of it will come from new water supplies. So a lot of what we've been doing is focusing in on those areas, working with the 16 regional water planning groups, because in Texas it's a bottom-up process. Nobody tells Texans what to do. They look at solutions and they develop them locally, look at different strategies. So we if you will, we have 16 different plans, and our role as a board is to come together and look at that and look at Texas, if you will, as an overall system to make sure that as we move forward and we develop water for Texas, that we have water for the coastal communities where we have the manufacturing, that we have water for West Texas where we've got the farming and cattle ranching operations. We've got water for, right now we have lots of water in East Texas, but that all the needs of the state's needs are met. One of the things that we've been doing as a board, and also with assistance from our staff, is traveling around Texas to get folks' thoughts and ideas. And I'm a big believer in meeting face-to-face. I think there's only a limited amount of things you can do by email or by telephone, and it's just a different input that you get when you go out and you see things for yourself. So we've been spending a lot of time going out and talking with folks about what we do as the Water Development Board, and also trying to receive their input on the kind of things that we can do better as a board to be more efficient in what we do and in the project that we help to facilitate. One of the areas that we've done is in the project part of our business is we've divided the states into 6 areas, and so each area now has its own project lead and its own project team. So now if a community has a challenge or concern, they can pick up the phone, and they always talk to the same person, and then that team can work with them. They're fully supported. They have a financial person, they have an engineer, and they can work with that community to find out what's a good financial plan for them, and also what's something that's promising in terms of helping them develop their scope. We also have a fabulous group of scientists and engineers that look across Texas and know what's promising. And I can tell you that it's not one big answer, it's a lot of different answers, and it's going to be different answers in different parts of the state. Along the coast, it may be desal. In other areas, it may be taking brackish water and desalinating groundwater. It may be piping water from one part of the state to another. Different solutions in different parts of the state. But one thing that we know is that all of it is interrelated. And so it's going to be important that as we move forward, we have a strong group and continue to support our scientists and engineers. So we have, if you will, we're a bank. We have Proposition 6, thank you very much. It is the effort of the oil and gas industry that put the money in the rainy day fund and allowed our legislators to move the $2 billion over. We promise you we are going to be good stewards of that. A lot of what we're doing right now is looking at how we protect the corpus to make sure that we can take the $2 billion and grow it into the $27 billion, which is what we've been told we'll need to be able to fund the water plan for the next 50 years. So we're working very diligently on our financial model. So we are a bank. We are a resource from technology with our scientists and engineers to be able to provide data to communities and businesses in terms of what's promising. But at the end of the day, because it is a bottom-up process in Texas, it's the communities that have to invest. And so we've been out talking with chambers. The San Angelo Chamber has done a great job in pulling this group together, and also working with other organizations throughout the state that have very strong membership. We know that it's important for us to tell the story. I also feel like, in kind of what we're hearing around the state, that oil and gas industry has done a great job in terms of some best practices for recycling and reusing water and being good stewards of what you do. But just like us, we need to be able to tell our story in a way that is simple and a way that people can understand. And I think also reach out to the messenger, because that's the most important thing that impacts people. You can have all the data. People look at data sometimes and they think you can pretty much make the numbers say whatever you want to, but it's good and it's important that it's science-based. But at the end of the day, it's the messenger that makes the difference. So we've been working and meeting with different groups that we know are powerful messengers. And I know President Dirksky is here today. We met with the Farm Bureau. We've met with the Southwest Cattle Raisers Association, and we're meeting with chambers across Texas. So important that we get our message out, important that we reach out to a broader group than just the water world, and let people know what we're up to, and also give them opportunities to offer their thoughts and ideas. Because what we know is that the availability of a reliable supply of fresh water is important to every sector, to every community in Texas. And we've got a big charge ahead of us. I promise you that we're working hard. We've got a great board. Carlos Rubenstein, Beck Broom, and myself as well as a wonderful staff. And we're working all very diligently. We work very closely with the Railroad Commission. Christie and Commissioner Porter have done a great job in terms of putting together workshops and bringing forth best practices, and we want to continue to do that. And we just appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And if there's ever anything we can do, we've got money to loan right here at home. So please come to us if you've got any kind of project. You can, at the end of the day, use our resources. If you choose to go out in the open market, that's fine. But we're asking you to please come and talk with the Water Development Board first.
Now, don't rush up for that loan. Okay? Nobody rush up.
My name's Lyle Larson. I'm a state representative out of the San Antonio area, and I sit on the House Natural Resource Committee. Unprecedented depletions in surface water and groundwater over the last 5 years in Texas. We've got some challenges. You've only got a few areas where we get new water, and I think this panel is looking at the reuse of the effluent. A couple years ago, I came out here when they were developing the Big Spring plant, and that was the first direct reuse plant, 100 million gallon system 2 million of it they're going to put the effluent in. If you look at it across the state, though, in the Beds to Banks law that provides that all of the communities would release the water after they've used it, 70% of the water in the city of Houston is effluent primarily from the city of Dallas. If you look at El Paso takes their effluent, pumps it out in an aquifer, picks it up about 3 years later, and they use it. It's being done all over the state. I think it's just when you go to the direct reuse application, the psychology water kicks in. Imagine when y'all go to Big Spring, you drink iced tea. And I would suggest to you that if you take that mindset, you need to drink iced tea everywhere, with the exception of where they're just pulling groundwater up. If you've got any surface water, that water has been used at some time before, so we need to get over that. I guess the best example of direct reuse are the astronauts. They've done it very effectively, and I don't think they've complained. So Texas, we've got to get more aggressive in their reuse of our effluent. We release that water. A lot of it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico without us capitalizing on it. Most of the states around us don't allow that to happen. They capture the water, and you're going to see more and more of that. People in Dallas are going to want to hold that 30% they haven't sold to Houston, and they'll start getting very aggressive about using that water versus building the transport projects out of East Texas and capitalizing on the resource that you have available. There's 4 places you can get new water in Texas. One of them is the reuse. The second one is the brackish component in the aquifers. You look at, in relation to other states, Florida's got 140 desal plants. The state of Texas has got 40. That is the new horizon for Texas water. It's ironic that the driest places in Texas are the areas we're producing oil and gas. With the exception of the Haynesville, all the other shale plays, we've got population centers that are running out of water. So you've got to find out how we can get water there in an affordable fashion. The brackish side of it, we need some regulatory relief, and I filed a bill last session to start the process of sitting down with the groundwater districts and determining how we can reconcile the issues of regulation of water that 5 years ago everybody considered bad water. Didn't even contemplate going in and using it. The technology we see from the oil and gas industry is revolutionizing the processes where we can treat the water. I mean, you look at the Eagle Ford and the number of companies like Apache that have come in very aggressively and using technologies, micro and nano filtration, softening the water up. The membrane technology is evolving every day, and the cost of water is coming down significantly. When you do the technology transfer into the public sector, that's where we're going to see the benefit of it. The desalination of water, everybody looks at the mega plant. San Antonio's building the largest inland desalination plant in the world right now. You'll end up right around 40 million gallons a day after they go through the 3 phases. The largest one's right now in El Paso. The folks in Odessa and other areas are looking at large-scale desal plants. So Texas, like Christy Craddock said, we just need to get out of the way, let the technology evolve, and allow folks to harvest that water and get us in a position that we're not going in and continuing to deplete the freshwater columns. The recycling of the water from the oil industry, I think they've set a great example. A lot of folks talk about the Texas miracle. I'm looking at the Texas miracle. It's oil and gas. And that's what's created in the departure between other states that are struggling financially and the state of Texas has to do with the energy resources that are under us. And if we impede the development of that, our state will fall subject to a lot of the same things that folks in other parts of the country. So water drives energy. Energy and water, they're part of the process for producing food. And for whatever reason, people have come into our committees and they start cutting each other up. The cities cut up the folks that are out in the ag world. The folks in the ag world are cutting up the oil and gas industry because they're using the same water that they're using. And I think we we're all Texans. We've just got to sit down and we've got to figure out a very deliberate process on how we go in and figure out how we get water for future generations. We can't look at it myopically and look at, what's going to solve the problem in San Angelo for the next 5 years. We need to have a 100-year plan. And I think the big issue is if we don't have that foresight, we could damage the opportunity for water to be harvested. We're not even contemplating right now, 20, 30, 40,000 parts per million coastal water that can be brought in. We don't want to damage those aquifers to a point where we can't come back and get that water as the technology gets better for 3 generations from now. So I think that's the big issue of trying to figure out from a regulatory standpoint how we can make this water available for folks. And I'm very optimistic that we'll get through this, but we've got to remember we're all Texans, and we can't continue to fight each other. The fiercest fights that I've seen in the legislature have to do with just the prospect of moving water from one part of the state to the other, on a transport project, or even in the same region. The issues about, what people are doing, the oil and gas companies, what are they doing as far as making sure that they're not hitting the potable water supply, how much brackish water, and there's always the suspicion that people are undermining the value of the water that's under their property. And I would suggest that we can't legislate good citizenship, but at the same time, we do need to make sure that the state has the resources that are available, and both the reuse and the brackish water is the water that I see as the future of Texas.
I'm Danny Reibel, and I'm Donovan Maddox Distinguished Engineering Chair at Texas Tech. Texas Tech lured me away from, some of you may know me that I spent some time at University of Texas, so I've kind of switched my hands here. But part of the reason that I was lured to Texas Tech was, in fact, that I recognized early on that water really is a cross-sector issue. It's ag, it is industry, it is municipal, and quite honestly, the opportunities at Texas Tech to be able to get in and work on some of these problems with an agricultural community, an agricultural school as well, has been quite important to me. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continue to try to work on the water problems in Texas and contribute in some small way to that. Part of the opportunities that I've had is recently chaired a water summit that we held with the Academy of Medicine, Engineering, and Science of Texas in Austin. And the particular challenge that we were trying to address in that summit was one that you had just alluded to, the problems as we face into the future generation of how we meet the demands, the tensions, and to essentially overcome some of those tensions between the various sectors. We're expecting in the future a near doubling of the state of Texas's population. A lot of that is going to be along the I-35 corridor. But certainly I'm sure that everyone in West Texas hopes to participate fully in that and see the economic growth that comes from that growth in population and the economy and the strengthening of the economy that also brings. If that's going to happen, we have to satisfy not only the problems of water today, but to a very different community, again, a near doubling in population over the next 50 years. And it is a real challenge, and it'll be a continuing tension between the various sectors of the economy. One of the particular focuses of the summit was to try to get agriculture, industry, oil and gas, as well as municipalities to begin a dialogue and or build on an existing dialogue to try to help, again, overcome some of those tensions that are going to be there. We do have real challenges. I'd specifically like to give you perspective today on, again, building on a theme that you mentioned, Lyle, is the oil and gas and some other components of our economy, the industrial components, the power generation, those components of the economy really are making do with a relatively small fraction of the water. Some 15% of the water demand in Texas really is certainly provides a disproportionate amount to our economy, and that is for industry, oil and gas, and power generation. And if we don't find a way to continue to support that 15% or the equivalent that will be needed into the future, I think it effectively that growth won't occur because the economy won't be able to sustain it. And so we do have to find a way to meet those tensions. It is perhaps surprising to many of you that when we look at things like power generation, we often see numbers of half of the water in Texas or close to it is being used in cooling water and power generation. But of course, we often have a confusion, I suppose, depending on which side of the argument you're on, as to withdrawals versus demand or consumptive demand. And I think it's very important that we focus on what are the real consumption of water. And for terms of power generation, traditional cooling waters, most of that is returned directly to the waterway in a relatively short period of time and essentially in identical form. And so it's not a consumptive use. The consumptive use is just a few percent of the state's water. Oil and gas is less than 1% for hydraulic fracturing of the state's water. Certainly, when we look at these industries, they are using relatively modest amounts of water, but they are extremely important to the economy. Of course, there's plenty of opportunities to conserve and to improve that even more, and some of those were identified. Cal identifying alternative sourcing. Conserve is a win-win situation all the way along, whether we're talking agriculture, municipalities, or industry. But again, it is important that we retain the ability to provide water for industry. And if we look at opportunities for new industries that might move into West Texas, if we look at something like the food industry, there are an increasing amount of activity within those companies, the corporate entities, to evaluate the sustainability of their future actions. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that evaluation and review that companies go through, at least at this initial stages, they're fairly crude assessments of things like sustainability, and part of that is water. And quite honestly, I'm quite concerned that a company such as Kraft might decide on the basis of their sustainability metrics, oh, we should just never move to West Texas because there's not enough water. I think it's very important that we deal with not only ensuring that there is enough water, that we also actually deal with some of the perception issues that there may not be enough water, that in fact if we want to grow, we want to attract those sort of industries to provide an active economy for that near doubling in population, we have to overcome some of the perception issues as well as the actual availability of water. And it is going to be a challenge, and we both have unique advantages in West Texas as well as some unique challenges. Certainly agriculture is a bigger part of the economy of West Texas than it might be in some other portions of the state. As a result, this tension between ag and industrial uses of water is certainly at the forefront, and of course it's been alluded to already. That again is something that we need to recognize, and the win-win is conservation, whether it's conservation and agriculture, to ensure that we provide no more water to crops than are actually needed by that crop to actually grow the crop, and the amount of water that evapotranspirates up into the air. We certainly don't want any extra. In municipalities, the conservation, San Antonio in particular, has had really a model for a lot of us in terms of how water use has enabled reductions in water use has really enabled a lot of it improvements really in things like the Edwards Aquifer situation. And so I think that we have models there, and certainly in industry, some of those that have been alluded to, the being able to manage and move both produced water, recycling water, the use of brackish water, which is of particular interest to me. We're trying at Texas Tech to help support Apache and trying to identify and evaluate brackish water resources to extend their use both for them and as well as other oil and gas companies. So these are all things that we have to move forward, and I really appreciate some of the comments that were made earlier about how we can take advantage of some of our opportunities here. I think that certainly we have a long road ahead, and I look forward in the question and answer session to discuss these even further.
Well, thank you, panel. I would like to, Commissioner Jackson, to recognize one of your employees, Doug Snow. Please stand, Doug. Texas, by statute, has said that 10% of the resources out of the Texas Water Development Board and the SWIFT account shall go to rural. And Doug is the rural ombudsman for the state of Texas. So if you live in rural Texas and you have a project that you want the Water Development Board to look at, Doug's your guy. So stand up again, Doug. Let them look at you. We have a lot of local officials here, and Doug's the guy you need to contact. And because Doug will therefore take projects to Commissioner Jackson and others, and so I just wanted everybody to see Doug. Thank you for coming, Doug. The other component of that is 20% of the money should go for conservation by statute. And so, Commissioner Jackson, would you talk about the rulemaking process that we're in right now and the timing of that? I know a lot of people here have a stake in the outcome of because the rules dictate the outcome. And so talk a little bit about the rulemaking process and where we are and where we're going to go with that.
Well, we've been very active, and we've gotten lots of comments from really folks around Texas. We did put together the draft rule, and that has been published in the Texas Register. The comment period will end on September 1. We are going on the road as a board in order to hear specifically what people's thoughts and ideas are and any comments they may have with the rule. As you mentioned, the rule is really a roadmap, if you will, of how we're going to be able to move forward and implement House Bill 4, and actually what our priorities are going to be in terms of projects that we'll be considering for funding and utilization of the $2 billion through the SWIFT. You do have to be a political entity. It cannot be, and it's all loan money. It's not grant money. So we're moving forward with the rule-making process right now. Our expectation is that by the end of the year, it will come back before the board. We will be at that time answering all of the comments that we received and actually make a decision on the final rule so that we'll have it in place before the legislature meets next year. The importance of the rulemaking process is that it's really going to set, if you will, the roadmap on how we're going to be implementing and, if you will, spending and funding projects to help to build water infrastructure throughout Texas. And the big piece of that I think has drawn most of the attention is the prioritization. There is a prioritization process as mandated by House Bill 4 that occurs within each of the regional water planning groups. And then there also is a prioritization process that the board will be doing, and certain things will be looked upon. And again, it's all kind of set out in the rule as it's in the draft format. Those projects that encompass different regions and impact larger populations, those projects that address conservation, and those projects that provide for the rural communities. I mean, all of those are included in the prioritization. So we just encourage everyone to become involved in the rulemaking process. And because, I mean, that's the only way we're going to make it better. We've heard back from a number of different organizations. And again, we're reaching out to those and asking for comments and also getting their thoughts and ideas.
Great. Well, thank you. And I do want to recommend to the audience that it's an important part of the process because, again, definitionally, what is rural? Definitionally, what is a conservation eligible project to be entitled to the funds? Initial projections are, correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, but there'll be about $850 million in necessary financing that might be available in the spring of next year that would come out of this process. So If you'd care to comment on that, or
Well, and again, kind of what our charge is to take the $2 billion and as an agency put together a financial model, because of course we need to be able to protect the corpus. We've got $2 billion, but we'll want to be able to make sure that we stretch it to the $27 billion, which we've been told is what we'll need to finance water supply projects through the 50-year period. So a lot of what we're doing right now is looking at the forecast and seeing how much, because the Texas Safekeeping Trust is the one that actually will invest most of the money, and so we'll be able to, we want to report back to them how much do we want to keep liquid and make available for loans, and then how much of it will they be able to invest for a longer term, and then of course that interest comes back into the fund. Through the, we'll finish the rulemaking process. We'll then be able to go out and ask for applications. We'll have a period at which we'll have to be able to sit down as an agency and as a board and review those applications, and then put together the funding model. So I think the estimate at this time is pretty close to what you mentioned, the $800 million. Of course, that'll be finalized after we look at the model and finish the final rule. But it could be by the time we get through all the steps of the process, it likely will be late summer, fall before we'll actually have some money that'll be going out to start building projects. And again, the key to everything is the money is available, but it's communities that are going to have to step forward and have the vision and want to invest and want to borrow the money and want to build the projects.
thank you. As I look out in the audience, I see various stakeholders. I see Mark McLaughlin, rancher. Ed Small represents the cattle raisers, and we have landowners, Alvin New and others, and Kenneth Deersky represents the Farm Bureau. Lyle and Dan, you touched a little bit about the competing property rights interests of various stakeholders throughout Texas, and obviously property rights is a fundamental tenet here in Texas, and we want to make sure everyone's rights are protected. But what do you see in the upcoming legislative session relating to the rule of capture and a taking? I mean, there's been some recent court decisions about what constitutes a taking, and with regard to rulemaking by groundwater districts. And so if you could give the audience a little of your background and expertise about what you see happening in the legislative session, about how we're going to muddle through this process, if you will, to establish some of those rules.
Will I be invited back to San Angelo?
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny. Scarcity drives a lot of decisions, and you look at San Angelo, December 2012, and you look at you push forward to April of 2013. You and I were having discussions. Less than 13 months of water supply to the largest community in America. Over 100,000 people. Wichita Falls in the same condition, and you look at the scarcity, and then you look at the inability to transport water into a community like this because of regulatory restrictions. And scarcity will drive some of the decisions along the I-35 corridor in the same fashion. You've got aquifers that have saturated thickness up to 400 to 500 feet, which is a lot of water. And it's not being utilized. It recharges. They pull it down during the growing season just a little bit, but that water needs to be moved to the population centers. But the property owners need to be compensated for it. And there's some restrictions in the groundwater level that don't want to allow the water to go. Some of it's not being driven by science, and some of it is. And so I think that it's imperative that we sit down and we make sure science and not politics are making those decisions. And I think in a large part of the state, we're doing the right thing. In some of the areas where we have a lot of water, that water is not being pushed to the population centers. And I use the example of San Angelo, Midland, Odessa, and in El Paso. There's water that we need to work with the areas in West Texas. There's some areas in the Fort Stockton area, out in Van Horn, and some other areas where you have a lot of water, but you can't take away their future as well. And so we've got to balance that. But you've got those prolific aquifers out there. We're trying to develop transport projects. The landowner wants to sell the water to the cities, and we've got these encumbrances built in. I think we've got to, in some way, we've got to figure a way to navigate through this, because it's not working. I mean, there are some areas in the state that we've got 46 communities that have less than 180 days of water right now, and a lot of that can be reconciled either through some of the desalination technology or a transport project. But for them just to die on the vine because people won't release their water, I think that's unacceptable. And so we've got to figure out how we deal with this. And I'm 100% behind the property rights of individuals, and at the same time, those folks ought to be able to sell their water and move it if they need to.
Dan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just I think it's really important that we eliminate some of those restrictions and encumbrances that are interfering in potentially a potentially functioning water market. I do believe that the way that we're going to balance those tensions in the various sectors is largely going to be driven by a functioning water market. That is, if you have something of value, i.e. water, and you can have an opportunity to sell it and take advantage of that opportunity, that you're able to do so. There have been estimates, this is actually from an ag economist, that if you look at the value of generated by an acre foot of water, that it is of the order of a couple of $1,000s in agriculture, of the order of $20,000 to $40,000 for power generation for that same acre foot of water, and up to $120,000 for hydraulic fracturing. And recognizing that, in fact, there is a potential market out there for that acre foot of water that can move it between sectors is probably the only way we're going to satisfy some of those tensions.
Well, and Cal, you might address that, from Apache's standpoint, the industry standpoint, that it makes economic sense for you to reuse and recycle production water, as opposed to purchasing it from the landowner where you drill the well. So you might address some of those economic models that Apache's gone through to base you're spending good money, wise money.
So in Apache, we have a little saying that we just don't do it if it's stupid. And if it's stupid, it means it doesn't make money. So everything we do about water, the big challenge was how to make it economically sensible. And, we got a free pass to lose some money in the beginning, but that was just in the very beginning. So I'm proud to tell you that we are actually we are really making progress in using less money for our water because we recycle it, because we're reusing it again, and because we found very efficient ways to do this. There are some things we learned that we really don't want to do. One thing we don't want to do is truck a lot of water, because trucking is incredibly expensive and the communities don't like it. We talk about our Barnard project and how much water we have recycled there. Scooter Foreman translated that into truckloads of water in Erie County. 80,000 truckloads were taking off the roads this year. Now, most of you don't see that because that's not your backyard, but it's a pretty impressive thing. And so you don't want to be trucking water to Dallas either. You want to be piping it, or vice versa. And pipelines are really important. One of the big things that's happened in water treatment here is that we've used lay flat pipes on the surface where we don't have to trench. And we use these for short periods of time, meaning months or maybe even a year, but we don't have to trench, and trenching costs are expensive. And then we can pick these pipes up and move them. And that innovation was, people borrowed technology from the military, but it was a really great idea. And it should be expanded all over the place because they're hard to break, these pipes, or have leaks about them. So reducing costs is really a critical part of it. And I think that the industry is really on the cusp of being able to deliver lots of water from produced water and retreat it in large facilities. There'll have to be some commercial arrangements to get smaller operators to want to use water from these bigger facilities. And that's another discussion for the political types to have. and that's a lot of you. So there are rights that we have to discuss in detail about transferring water from one place to another.
Well, interesting thought. I mean, the thought just occurred to me. I mean, you have created a lot of infrastructure, very costly infrastructure, to provide water for your operations. Is there added capacity that you have available, or perhaps as an industry we could try to encourage and incentivize to make available to other smaller operators that don't have the capability of investing as Apache has, or perhaps communities that would have access to some of those resources? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think there can be a really serious water business in Texas, and I think we should all encourage it, because what I love about this state most of all is business works here. That's why we're all in this room, you know. Some other places I visit, I wonder how they get by. So, and there'll be a lot of business in water, but right now we are moving the cost of water down, and that makes it possible to create that business. Because when water is $8 or $10 a barrel, forget it. You don't have very many buyers, even though Danny's probably right. There are a few oil companies that would pay that much for frac jobs because they're desperate. But that's a limited market.
Commissioner Craddock, I mean, obviously you use the words, get the agency out of the way and let industry take hold of that. Do you have any, from a regulatory standpoint, how the commission is able to craft rules and regulations that incentivize that type of activity? And if you could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I think first and foremost, and I'm going to say this, if I can backtrack on the question,
Okay.
if you don't mind for a second. You know, one of the things that I think this industry is doing, and I know my office is outreaching a bunch to the ag world, because I think there's a lot of symbiotic relationships between oil and gas and agriculture. And if we take agriculture right now, a lot of times, and Cal can tell you this, when you're an operator and you're out dealing with the surface owner, you're buying their fresh water, and they're making more money off the water that they're selling you as a fresh water than they're making in agriculture right now. So that becomes a challenge of how you make sure the agriculture community and the landowners specifically continue to work and operate in the state, but that the oil and gas industry doesn't drain them dry. I think that's an interesting debate for us. But as we do rules at the Railroad Commission, part of our challenge and part of my challenge is how you make a one-size-fits-all rule, because you can't do it. And we have a state, I somewhat joke that we have about 8 different states within Texas, because every place is different. And so how you make a rule that is incentivizing, and I call it the carrot rule basically, and part of how we've incentivized with our recycling rule is really liability issues. And you don't have to come back and get a permit if you're reusing your own water or allowing somebody else to use it. So you don't have to spend your time getting permits from us. You can just go forward. We're seeing some recycling that is that it's traveling recycling, so it's mobile recycling, but a lot of it's economies of scale still, and how you get a smaller operator to incentivize, because they don't have the dollars to spend like Apache. And frankly, when you look at the lifeblood of this state, historically, it's been smaller operators, and we're glad to have Apache back and others, and a lot of smaller operators are looking at ways to use brackish water, for instance, but recycling is still, and the technology isn't final. I think Cal may tell you they use one technology and their competitor down the road may use a different technology. We see several different technologies out there, so one size doesn't fit all. And the cost, until the cost continues to come down, it's hard to incentivize. We've had a lot of conversation, or companies have come to us, and so I toss it back to you, the 2 legislators sitting in the room, that they'd like, or the 2 sitting up here, that they'd like to see incentives, whether they get a severance tax break or something like that for recycling. They think that would accelerate recycling potentially. So that's one of the conversations that people have come to me, which obviously I don't have the authority to do, but have come to me and said they'd like to see. But I think overall we've got to continue working with everybody in the state, kind of like everybody said, and I know there are groups, and I'm sure Lyle's aware of this as you may be, that are sitting in a room talking about water before it comes to y'all as as legislators this session, and the Railroad Commission's a piece of that, which we want to be, because as some of you know, and I'm saying we do more than just recycle water. One of the things we make sure we do, and you have to have as an operator from us, we have a groundwater advisory unit. Was part of TCQ until about 8 years ago and moved over to us, but what it does is this. Before you drill a well in this state, you have to get a letter from the groundwater advisory unit, and they tell you where you have to protect the usable quality water and how far down you have to case a well. So we take it very seriously at the Railroad Commission about our casing rules have just been updated, about we're protecting water in our state and making sure that those permits are followed, because we want to make sure there are no mistakes in water, because every drop counts for us.
Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes, which is a lot more than Tryon Lewis allowed you. At least 5 times as much. So, raise your hand. Well, it's very complicated. Basically, the question is, who's going to monitor the effect, if you will, of all of these water projects on the on the groundwater districts throughout the state of Texas? And I guess there's obviously going to be input from the groundwater districts themselves, input from engineers hired by the development board, and obviously the legislature has an interest in protecting those rights from that each of these projects originate from. Commissioner Jackson, do you have a comment on that, or?
Well, only to, I guess maybe share with you some of the things that we've heard in traveling around Texas, and from groundwater supply districts and others, is exactly what you have voiced today, is this need for good data, for good monitoring, so that not only do they know that what we're withdrawing today, but also projecting what we're going to be able to do in the future is something that's sustainable. And in fact, we had one district that came in, and they must have kind of like been at this desperate cry for like an impartial, if you will, third party, because he said that, you know, the situation right now is that many of these districts are out there kind of hiring their own experts, and he was really pleading for the need of someone like the Water Development Board to be, if you will, you know, the holder of all of the data and the impartial third party. And he basically said, you know, we don't need the money. We can go get the money. What we need to move forward is the science and the data to make sure that we're all marching forward together. We're marching down the right path, and that, you know, something that everyone can look for in terms of policy.
And Lyle, I know you travel throughout the state, and I don't know how many groundwater districts you've visited right now, but if you'd have some thoughts to share on that also. Yeah,
I've met with Paul, and we have 97 groundwater districts, and I've met with over 50 of them and sat down. And the point you make is, if you look at the architecture on how we regulate water, we got 16 regions, but I think the state has abdicated its responsibility looking at it globally. And I know that Carlos Rubenstein's talked about the vision issue about sustainable growth in the state. It's great to have local control, but if you look at the aggregate and what the impact, especially if you're over the same aquifers and you've got different regulatory schemes working on them, it's the inconsistency is what's going to kill us. And so we need more science. The geotechnical downhole information that the oil and gas industry is giving us right now, that's helping us identify the highly productive brackish zones, and we'll address the governance of going out and getting it and bringing it into the population centers. But the overarching issue is, who is the arbiter of all this information? And I think that the Water Development Board is the right place to have it. Right now, they're an advisory committee. They don't have a lot of regulatory framework built in statutorily, and I think we need to size it up, because that's where all the science is. And they don't have enough science right now. We've got inconsistent data flowing in, because the individual groundwater district hires a hydrologist, and a person that owns property over it can hire a different hydrologist, come out with a whole different set of facts, because the assumptions are different. So somewhere we're going to reconcile. Other states do that. Other states have that overarching architecture where they look at it and they know where the water is, where the water needs to be moved, And for sustainability purposes, they draw it down to the gallon, how much water is available for a 50-year or 100-year plan. And we're missing that right now. And I think somewhere we're going to have to, the state's going to have to step in and fill that hole.
One more question, Jim Hughes.
Absolutely. I know that we were having a discussion about Corpus Christi. I think they'll be the first community they'll move on it. They're very forward-thinking in their planning. You look at the development of their surface water now. They're looking at developing the first coastal desal plant. They're trying to figure out how you mix industry in with the public sector in developing something that can protect those refineries down on the coastline. I think your next one will be in Houston, and your third one will be in Brownsville, and that water will come across. I think there's two other areas that we've got a lot of water. In East Texas, you talk to people in East Texas about their water, and they get a little aggravated about it. And now, when the state goes in and spends $1.3 billion addressing hurricane devastation from Ike and from Katrina, they want to be Texans. But when we talk about taking their water out, they forgot about that other part. So I think we've got to look at it. We're all Texans or we're not, and we'll address the issues as they come in front of us. So the other area that we can get a lot of water is from the states that join us. If you look at the last time we've had a meaningful dialogue with the people in Baton Rouge, Little Rock, and Oklahoma City was after the drought of the 1950s. There is a ton of water in those states. But we've let regional water districts go out and try to cut those deals. It is incumbent upon the state to go out and start addressing some of our water shortages in the Metroplex area and throughout the state with states that are joining us. It just makes a lot more sense logistically to move that water. We just got to take our cowboy hat off, show a little humility, walk in there and start cutting deals for their water as well.
Every year the Mississippi floods, we could funnel some of that over here.
Yeah, 32 million acre feet flow through Oklahoma every year. 2 million acre feet they actually use. I'm going to file a bill that for every kid that they recruit in Texas to play football in Oklahoma, we get 10,000 acre feet of water.
Can I add just a short comment to that? Is that I don't think we should overlook the brackish water resources that are in West Texas. Keep in mind that anything that is desalination on the coast, the first thing you have to bring it up 1,000 foot to Austin, 3,000 foot to Lubbock if you're trying to move it west. Think of a water tower 3,000 foot high. It takes a while. It takes a lot of energy to pump it up there, and plus the cost of the desal. Brackish water is in general easier, less energy intensive to desal. And the total brackish water resources underneath the western U.S. are at least 10 Great Lakes. But there are challenges to tap into that, but certainly some communities are. And so there's a balance of where we desal.
Well, and, one additional comment, and then we're through. The desal operation in Corpus and Houston and Brownsville will serve a dual purpose. Number one, it will give water to those communities, but it will reduce the demand of those communities for stream flow downstream. So as we help Corpus Christi, Houston, Brownsville develop their water resources, perhaps out of the ocean, then that will cut down on that 70% coming down the river affluents, and will allow Dallas and other communities to take that water and reuse their own affluent. So another comment on the 80,000 trucks you're taking off the roads, that has particular significance to this representative, certainly to Chairman Larry Phillips, who will lead a transportation committee this afternoon about that very issue. So that's good information. What a great panel. Let's thank them.